Hello, everyone. My name is Noelle Peart, and I'm the head of diversity, equity, inclusion at Exos. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Larry Green, health and performance program manager, real estate and workplace services at Google, Sarah Sarkis, senior director of psychology at Exos. But let me tell you a little bit about both of my guests before we get into our great conversation. Larry is a global service delivery lead for Google's health and performance programs. He's a servant leader and communicator with the ability to connect wide range of people. He focuses on building strong relationships, team synergy, while delivering results. He's adopted Bruce Lee's philosophy to navigate life experiences by researching his own experience, absorbing what's useful, rejecting what's useless, and what's essentially his own. The foundation of his career comes from his days as Division I basketball player. We'll talk a little bit about that at the U.S. Naval Academy. Larry served for 5 years in active duty as supply officer in the Navy, and after the military, he came over to Silicon Valley holding various strategic and global operation roles. So welcome, Larry. Now let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. Sarah is our senior director of performance psychology here at Exos. She's also a licensed psychologist and a certified executive coach. Sarah moonlights as a writer and a speaker. Her style blends components of positive psychology, neurobiology, Eastern philosophies of self-regulation, and coaching to promote self-awareness and growth. She spent 20 plus years in the trenches, exploring every corner of the human psyche. Her passion and focus these days is working with CEOs, athletes, professional coaches, and other executives striving to achieve moonshot dreams. She considers herself a hybrid part shrink, part coach, and part Jedi of the unconscious. We're going to get into that because I'm going to need a little bit more detail. So today is actually National Coaches Day, and we're going to put our own spin on coaching here at Exos and discuss how cultivating a coaching culture can combat the idea of quiet quitting. Everyone's heard about that, right? So today we're going to talk about how leaders can prevent quiet quitting by fostering results-oriented work environment that activity and engagement with sacrificing personal values. But to describe and what quiet quitting is for everyone. Quiet quitting is a viral workplace trend that has been sweeping the internet all year. This term sparks some fierce online debate, and I've seen it in a lot of different articles. Depending on who you ask, employees who quiet quit are either slacking or just refusing to work beyond their job description. Now, despite its recent popularity, researchers at workplace analysis company Gallup say the trend is not new. According to research, quiet quitters have accounted for at least 50% of the U.S. workforce since 2002, with that figure edging higher over the past 2 years. Now, employee engagement took another hit in these past 3 months in June this year. According to research, the proponent of engaged employees in the U.S. workforce dropped to 6-year low of 32%. This is because people have become less clear about what they expect from work, feel less cared about by their employer, and are less connected to the company's purpose, and are ultimately disengaged. And here, we're going to talk about that today. These disengaged workers aren't just quiet quitters. They're not good for business in the long run. And this blame lies with how management roles have evolved in the modern working landscape. So to combat quiet quitting, managers need to help with goal and priority setting, ongoing conversations, and accountability. So Larry and Sarah, I want to get your take on quiet quitting and how to keep employees engaged but not overworked by creating a culture of coaching. Now, before we start, anyone who's out there viewing, please feel free to input your questions in the comment box and stay tuned again to learn how you can gain even more insights. So first off, who wants to go first? What's your take on quiet quitting? Is it truly slacking, or is it really employees setting work-life balance, in this new remote environment we're in? Who wants to first stab?
I'm happy to take a stab at it if it's a choose your own adventure. Yeah, so the quiet quitting is like the newest trend. You used a really good word. And I think it's important for us to look at trends. But I often think in the headlines, there's like a move to try to make it clear what it is, to have an answer about what it is. And truthfully, we don't fully understand what it is. There is, like most human trends, it's probably a tapestry of sort of multi-determined factors that are leading. And so when we take that kind of complexity into it, we sort of realize, look, there's going to be a percentage of it that is like, quote, slacking. And then there's going to be a percentage that isn't actually unhealthy. That it depends what you're quitting. What am I quitting is a question to ask ourselves, right? So there's that percentage. And then there's a key percentage that's left that's about disengagement, period, full stop. And we've seen the trend. You gave all the statistics, right? That piece about disengagement, we should dig into. That's the space to get really curious, really listen, and start to really ask great questions of the people we're seeing this behavior from. I don't know, Larry, how do you kind of feel about that assessment?
Yeah, Sarah, I really appreciate what you're sharing. I have a lot of similar thoughts. And Noelle, to your question, is it slacking versus setting healthy boundaries? It's one of those when just the word quiet quitting, in my opinion, is one of those loaded statements. Quiet quitting, as well as quiet firing too. That's the other one that's trending out there as well. But yeah, it's a multivariate situation. A number of factors to consider. Some of the things that I think about are like the context of the individual, as well as the context of the organization, the generational phenomenon, because we have millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, so that's another dimension. But Sarah, to your point, I think it comes down to the framing of that expression. Quiet quitting is where my mind goes. And for quitting, I do think about engagement and ownership, double clicking into those dimensions of quitting, quote unquote, and what does that mean in that regard?
It's such a good point because that's the disengagement. Like inside the organization, people in the team, people feel it as disengagement. In psychology, for centuries, we've had a word for this. It's apathy, and people start to withdraw, and we feel that inside of our teams if we're attuned, and to lean in. You can hear in Larry's language, there's a leaning into it, trying to be really curious and engage people around this trend versus have the answers for why it's happening. My experience has been if you create the practices inside yourself, this is why we're here talking about this, because coaching style, coaching culture falls in this realm. But if you create the internal practices inside yourself as a leader around curiosity, around listening, question asking, creating a safe environment, that people will actually talk about what's going on for them. They really will. They're not trying to make it a mystery. We aren't asking the right questions.
I love that. I love both your points of view, and especially leading into coaching, right? Into creating that culture where people can show up to be their best. And that's what our role is as leaders. And both of you are coaches, right? In what you do, whether it's in the boardroom, Larry has done it on the field in terms of coaching athletes as well, and physically and Sarah mentally. So there's so much connection here. And I want to dig a little deeper into this coaching culture. So like, how do you define it? Because there's so much out there, Forbes says a coaching culture means supporting your employees so that they can learn new skills and become greater assets to the company. But what are some ways that you've seen it, and how is it really important in keeping employees engaged and combating this quiet quitting culture?
Yeah, I would say for me, I can start it off for this one. And this is where I pull from other dimensions of life. Noelle, to your point, used to play basketball. I've done some literally coaching athletes, worked with a number of players, even in the military, active duty. So pulling from those different experiences and how that shows up for me in corporate America. And the way I think about it in terms of setting up coaching culture, just a couple of things. For starters, it's just creating an atmosphere for the team to succeed. And with that, the things that I think about are being a willing servant as well as being a willing steward. And then like the connective tissue for all of that is just having the idea that one another relationships is the glue or the oil that just makes it all work. In short, we are each other's keeper is how I like to think about it. So those are some of the things, how I set it up. There's a number of particulars that get into that, but that's how I started off.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like the whole concept of creating the physical space, right? Whether it's on a court or in a boardroom, but also that you create the space between people, right? And you can hear all that component of what I was saying earlier involved in this. Like, I would imagine that when people are listening to what Larry just said, it's like, yeah, well, it sounds really easy. I would imagine it was a lifetime, Larry, of using your own person as the craft, as the tool that can sort of like feel this out and feel this space out and create this space. And I come from a very different, so I am a psychologist. I still have like a boutique private practice. And actually I came to it from a place that I was sort of trained to have answers for people. I was trained like a leader, right? And I got in the trenches and realized that none of those explanations were helping in the slightest. And in many times I was having people sort of chasing tails. So I came to coaching from finding out that my style wasn't working in the way that I wanted to be of service. So for me, coaching was a whole separate practice that I really started to get into, and the reward of relieving myself of having to be. And I'm sure that a lot of leaders out there are listening and thinking, oh, I really resonate with that. Like, I don't have the answers. I don't have the solutions. I don't have a magic ball that's going to tell us how this is all going to work out. And the more I showed up as a coach, the more effective the work was. And then that really sort of sent me into the realm that I'm in now. So that's how I see coaching. I see coaching as somebody who is side by side with you. They are in the trenches. Their sleeve is rolled up. They are using themselves to help you find your best potential.
I love that, because both of you spoke about using your lived experiences to make you the best coaches, to enable this environment, right? Physically, and as you said, connecting with people, Dr. Sarah. So I think that's huge, especially as you think about getting people to where they want to be, achieving their goals, getting them ready for the moment that matters, and driving high performance, right? Like, that's part of this work as well. So how do you take those lived experiences that you have to help people to get them where they want to be, to drive high performance in whatever they do, whether it's on the field, the court, or in the boardroom?
Yeah, so one thing that comes to mind for me for that, I'm going to go to another context, is the whole idea of gardening, houseplants, things like that. So growing up, me and my family, we used to have a family garden. And so I learned a lot of just the fundamentals of just how to grow vegetables and those things like that. And then during the pandemic, since we were, things were very shut down, I got back into houseplants, and we had a little garden in our backyard. And so just kind of getting into that, because I was at home all the time. And so I could literally sit around and watch the plants grow because there was nothing else to do, no place to go.
Quite literally.
Yeah, literally. And so with that, I think of just the concept of being a gardener or a farmer, to where you just create the conditions so the plants can grow and thrive and do their thing. So in a gardening or a houseplant situation, you got your soil, water, and light, sunlight. Those are the major factors. There are a few other little nuanced things, but being able to just pay attention to those factors and adjusting whatever needs to be adjusted so that those plants can thrive. That's how I think about, driving higher performance, bringing it into a corporate context or a team context.
Yeah, I love that. I have envy over that. I have envy, and I'm like, oh, I love that answer so much. I agree completely. If I was going to because that's like at the metaphoric level. And by the way, that's the level that sort of we have to start to grasp it at, is like, do you notice how Larry's almost talking about getting out of the way more than being in the way of the environment? There's a real lesson in letting go and surrender, and some restraint in becoming an effective servant, coach, leader. And Larry, you clearly have it dialed in. If I was going to go one notch deeper, if somebody was out there thinking, okay, but what's like something I could do today to move in this direction, right? I think of 3 areas that you can start to cultivate inside yourself. And the great thing is, doing it inside yourself, you model it, and you practically don't have to do anything externally then. That's why people think coaching leadership style takes so much work. And they're like, the number one reason people don't incorporate this style of leadership into their suite of skills is they say they don't have the time. But the miraculous thing is it is a time saver once you've learned some of these skills. So I would say 1 is really look at the environment you have around psych safety. And we can sort of flag that and dive deeper in if we have time. It's sort of a topic unto itself, but it might be worth exploring. Around psychological safety, how safe do people feel to show up and be themselves? And where you find gaps, be really curious about what's fueling those gaps. Start your curiosity quest there. And then start to challenge every time you want to give advice. Find an open-ended question first. You can give the advice later, but find an open-ended question. And then the third is listen more than you talk. If you just did those, do you think that's like a safe starter kit, Larry, as like if they woke up and said, okay, today I'm going to start implementing this style into my leadership?
I would say yes. And like to kind of like connect it to the metaphor, the gardening metaphor, like the water, the light, and the soil. Find the water, the light, and the soil, or those key elements within your context or within your job that are those key factors, like psychological safety, and then begin to lean into those things and allow those things to grow and emerge. So yeah, definitely. And one other thing you just reminded me of, great basketball player, the late, great Bill Russell. He wrote this leadership book a number of years ago. And one of his points in that book was about curiosity. And the way he framed it is just to relax and be curious, because when you're in that state of flow, you'll end up asking the right questions and your instincts will begin to go into those right places when you just relax and be curious.
It can't be underestimated. It sounds like we're throwing a softball. People are like, curious, of course I'm curious. No, this is different. In psychology, we call it an observing ego. It's so hard. First of all, you have to observe yourself. Secondly, it has to be sans critique, right? And then once you have that capacity, you can genuinely start to lean in, to be truly curious about somebody or a dynamic inside your team without an agenda. That is so much harder than we think it is, because we're agenda making machines. That's what we do all day long, especially when we're in a pressure cooker.
I love this conversation, and both of you are so spot on, right? As you talked about, Dr. Sarah, like listening with intent, right? My grandmother used to say, right, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It's to listen and to make sure you understand people, and I think that's really important. But I want to circle back and to hear, especially from both of you, around psychological safety. We have leaders on this call who are trying to figure that out, especially like as I'm, here in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world, like that's a big topic. And it's especially when you think about culture and how do people make people feel safe? Because you can't just say, bring your authentic self to work and be who you are. The environment has to be there in order for it to truly exist. So let me hear your thoughts. Like, how do leaders create it? How do they cultivate it? And how is it not just when they first walk in? How does it maintain? Because I think that's the other big piece too, in order to combat quitting culture.
You want to tackle this one first, Larry?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. I got a couple of, I'll call it practical application experience thoughts that come to mind, because again, I'm not a psychologist. I just have my practical experience. I would say for me, when it comes to psychological safety, especially as the leader in the group or the room or the organization, is to practice vulnerability and practice courage. Because when you do that, especially as the leader person in the room or the org, that indirectly creates permission for others to do the same. And so, so as an example, one thing I've been practicing to get good at, because I've not been good at this, overall, this is a fairly recent thing, is like literally practicing bringing my whole self to work. And what does that mean? Sharing different sports analogies and things, because, being a college basketball player, I played basketball, or basketball has been a part of my life literally almost all my life. And so I have a ton of life lessons, teamwork lessons, a number of things that can be extracted and applied into a corporate context. But in the past, I've been a little shy to do that because I don't want to come across as the jock or the the person that's not as intelligent, and then you throw in different factors, because I have, visible dimensions to me that make me, not the majority. So as a Black man in America, being able to acknowledge that and acknowledge my experiences and how that plays out, being vulnerable in that way and practicing and having the courage to share those different things begins to create the permission for you to do it. And then, Noelle, to you, the sustaining point that you were talking about, don't forget that you're a human being, so as life happens to you, just keep, sharing your story of like, hey, today was great, or I'm running late, or I got to change my schedule because this is going on in life, or something like that, because you're a human being, just like everybody else.
Yeah. This is spot on, and it's incredibly true. And the only thing I would say is, when you're like, I'm not a psychologist, I just have my lived experiences. It's not just. That's the key. It's our lived experiences. That is what makes us all, right? It's like, well, I don't have the upper hand on you. I'm just a human too, right? With the same lived experiences. But, psychological safety as a concept, all those preconditions, again, what Larry's pointing out is how much that your leadership style and the culture and the permission and the environment that you infuse by using these styles of being, they model to your team members what is okay and what is not okay. And that's actually the most potent form of training for human beings. It sort of lies under the do what I say, not as I do, right? Or if you have kids, you know this because you see them doing stuff where you're like, oh, they were watching, right? Meanwhile, I told them a million times not to do it, but they were watching. I was modeling, right? So same potency here. Psychological safety as a concept, again, it's a whole summit. Like we could come back and just deconstruct this, the three of us. There's a couple of things that are kind of important to me as a psychologist. So I want to squeeze this in. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, something that's really important to me that people understand about psychological safety is that there's 4 stages. And inclusion, feeling included, is the first stage. There's 3 additional stages. So when we're attempting to coach and lead and create culture together, we can't once people feel included, be like, we're good. We checked this box. There's 3 more phases before we have an environment where that person who now feels included can fully show up and not feel that it's expensive to be him, her, or their self, right? That is just a really important distinction. And actually, much to some leaders' chagrin, the last phase is when you can see and handle dissent inside of your teams, that you can really navigate friction and difficulty. So psychological safety is key. I think I don't want to waste any, the whole time on it because it's a thing unto itself, as I said. But if you don't have it, when in Larry's analogy about gardening, you don't have the soil that will ever yield the crop you're looking for. You've got to do the soil work, and vulnerability, creating a space where you yourself fully show up, where you admit your foibles as a leader, where you admit when you don't really know the best next decision, let's work on this together. Those are all unconscious cues of belonging.
I love it. I love it. And you're right. The 3 of us could go on a little world tour talking about psychological safety.
We made a flag that dude for a follow-up.
Yeah, it
I
might be
love
part
it.
two.
I do have one question that came in from the group just about psychological safety before we move on. Maureen asks, what's a good evaluation tool or check in that leaders can use to understand their effectiveness when providing psychological safety? They know they're doing it. It's up for grabs.
Yeah, so I don't tend to, I could probably get back to you on the best assessment tool. I don't lean on assessment. I tend to lean on, I would be much more the style like, well, let's go talk to people. Let's roll our sleeves up. Let's get our listening ears. Let's get a handful of really good open-ended questions and let's hit a roadshow. Let's start talking to people about this experience because that's bang for your buck. That's, you're connecting deeply, you're modeling the principles of coaching, and you're giving people a voice to be heard because you're decidedly not trying to curate the feedback to make you feel good like you're succeeding, because we've already covered that role of that genuine curiosity. We're just going in as an experiment, and in true experiments, we expect diversity of responses.
Yeah, I agree with that, Sarah. I was thinking a similar thing is I'm sure there's some great tools out there, but I lean towards the good old fashioned way of just talking to people, spending time together, and then looking for the organic results that come, similar to like how plants grow, just seeing when you tweak, when you set it up in that way, see how the population or the group responds. If they're responding in a particular way, like for example, with houseplants, they tend to grow towards the sun and they may lean too far. So you need to just twist the plant around so it'll straighten back up. And so being able to adjust and do those variables through conversation, through relationships, and then watching how the organic results will emerge from that.
And they will emerge. What Larry's understating here is that groups have so many dynamics happening, right? The moment a strategy is implemented, so a question is asked, the group starts forming around it and they start giving you feedback. It's a living entity, right? And so that data is rich and it is nuanced, and there are great assessments. So if somebody's super interested in assessment, we will scout one out for you.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm spot. Both, I couldn't agree more. Hearing from the people and understanding and feeling right with them, I think, is going to be your best understanding of if you're doing it. I have one more question that came up, and Larry, you mentioned it before, so I'll start with you. You mentioned the term quiet firing. So, like, what's your thoughts about that? As that's this new conversation that we're starting to see.
Yeah, so I guess for all the listeners, the way I'm understanding the expression of quiet firing, it's almost like the reverse dynamic. So the org, is beginning to engage less with a particular individual. So for example, like in a project management situation, everybody's getting a certain amount of opportunities for projects, but this individual starts to get less, or they get uninvited to certain meetings. And, they kind of get isolated to a degree. And it creates like a weird dynamic, in like almost an unspoken way, that person might be encouraged to leave, or something like that. And so I think it's a similar underlying thing, quitting versus firing, engagement and ownership. Because from a leadership point of view, personally, if I was in that situation, I would try not to quietly fire someone. If there's an engagement issue or an ownership issue, let's talk about the issue and let's dive into that. Now, again, it's a corporate situation, and people are free to come and go. And if something's not the best fit, then it's all good. Like, let's not play games or waste a lot of time. And like, if there's if a better opportunity is awaiting somebody else in another situation, then hey, it's all good in my opinion. But being able to just engage those opportunities, or those opportunities to grow and develop, in that way is how I approach that. That's how I'm understanding quiet quitting, quiet firing, those silent killers relationships.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that. And I think that that was a spot on analysis of what that is. So we're coming up on time. So before I let you go, I would love to hear from both of you. Start off the conversation talking about creating this coaching culture. If you could give the group about 1 to 2 takeaways of like what they need to do and to empower, whether it's themselves as the recipients of working with a coach and or the coach, what are some things that you would tell them? So, Dr. Sarah, I'll have you start.
Yeah, much of what we've sort of covered. I mean, I think start with yourself. Start with really investing in time and energy and understanding your style, like what's going on inside of you that you can change so that the soil and the environment becomes more favorable to everybody being able to show up, right? And that also, it's not like this isn't a destination, right? This is a feeling or a process much more than a destination. So, like, you're not late to the party. Like, you're on time and you got all the time you need. You have till you're not here anymore to kind of keep on developing this. But you can hear this role of sort of emotional intelligence, attunement, and then there's these other soft skills related to interpersonal dynamics around vulnerability, creating boundaries, showing up fully yourself. By the way, tolerating discomfort. Like if you want psychological safety and you want people to have it at the highest level, you have to handle friction. You have to handle dissent. You have to learn to tango with it, right? So that's what I would say for people to really turn their gaze toward.
Yeah, and then building off of that, Sarah, love what you were sharing there. I'll pull some sports things into a corporate context. So a couple quick things. I would say collaboratively establish the space that you're operating in with your key stakeholders, and then set that space with the right nudges and prompts or the right, agreed upon behaviors that can just help to practice those things and bring those things to life. And then I would also say is have a clear North Star, which could be a mission, vision, major thing, objective, something like that. And then always practice mapping how your actions and decisions point towards that North Star. If something does not point towards that North Star, then that's either a prioritization thing or an adjustment thing. So being able to consistently map that and then just practice these things, have feedback and learning loops so you can continually adjust. And then the last thing I would say is be generous with grace, because we're all human beings. We're all trying to figure it out. We're not all going to get it 100% right all the time. Be generous with grace so that we can, continually learn and get better.
I love it. I don't know about y'all audience, but there were so many nuggets from Larry and Dr. Sarah that we took away today. One I'll just add to the greatness that both of them just said is also finding accountability partners, right? As you're creating this coaching culture, as Larry just said, you're going to have grace within yourself, but work with some people, right, to make sure that you are asking the right questions and doing the right things. And then if you're not, those people are your safe space to be able to help you and let you know and guide you if you're not on the right path. So accountability partners there. I have a bunch of friends on them on the call right now are out there, some of my accountability partners. So thank you so much, Larry Green and Dr. Sarah Sarkis, for joining us today. Thank you, audience, for joining us today. If you want to learn more about how to create a coaching culture by clicking the link in our blog post in the comments below, there is more to come. So thank you so much, and hopefully you took home some fantastic notes from this group. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thanks, team.
Thanks.